Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. I'm going to give people another minute or two to log on and get situated. If you wouldn't mind doing me a favor, and if you can hear me okay, there should be a little question box. Just post something in there letting me know you can hear and you can see and all that. And we'll get started in just another 2 minutes. Okay, great. We'll go ahead and get started then. I appreciate everyone taking the time out to talk this afternoon. We're going to talk a bit about e-mentoring and virtual mentoring and how we might incorporate that into different programs that are doing mentoring during this current health crisis. So I'm going to start with a poll, just how everyone is kind of feeling right now. I'll wait for everyone to submit. All right, looks like we're about 50-50. Could need a nap and want to get out of the house. I think that about coincides with where I'm at too. So just I want to get a sense of the room, but just to test that too, there's the question box at the bottom on the right, which you can use at any point while we're talking to ask any questions and pose anything that you might be particularly curious about. But why don't you take a minute now and post a few things in there about what sort of pastimes, passions are you using to help yourself de-stress a little bit. So pop in the question box. What things are you doing to make life a little bit more bearable? So it looks like a few people are. It seems like a pretty common answer is getting outside and eating, learning to sew, reading, um, getting out. I know I've been doing that too, trying to get out of the house as much as possible. Awesome. Well, you feel free to use that same question box if you have any questions as this comes up. We are going to keep it moving. So I'm actually going to turn on my webcam so you guys can see me. I think it makes it a little bit more personal. So there you go. Awesome. So here's our agenda for the day. So we're talking a bit about why e-mentoring, why is this something we would want to do, why is it useful? Some considerations before you get started doing e-mentoring, some relevant technology, how do you review mentors, do online training. Oh, I thought I took that out, but we did something similar for some programs in New York City that had extra special policies. I must have forgot to take out the agenda item on that. So you obviously don't have to worry about that. You're not in New York City. Establishing guidelines and enhancing communication and monitoring and support. So what is the value of virtual mentoring? First and foremost, helps offset isolation. All of us are, sitting at home, spending time away from our communities. Perhaps we have loved ones at home, sometimes we don't. And so doing this with our young people that we work with, they're going through a lot of the same things that we are in terms of feeling isolated, feeling disconnected, particularly for young people where sometimes family isn't a source of that kind of connection like it can be with other people, and especially for us as we are, adults. And so using some sort of electronic or virtual mentoring to help offset that is something we want to make sure we're doing for our young people. A safe space to process feelings. I mean, that's what mentoring is all about, right? You build that relationship that allows for a safe space in order for young people to feel like they have space to process and engage. It's a safer vantage point to build trust. So there is still a little bit of distance, which allows for some young people who might not feel as comfortable engaging in person or playing games or whatever, a bit more space in order to build trust. So you can start with, emailing, using some sort of text messaging platform, and then transitioning into video. And it allows for an even slower trust building, which can be really helpful for some young people. Increased social capital. There's been lots of resources, and we'll talk a bit about this later and as well next week, but lots of websites, resources, things like that that have been put online for free. And so, we're able to use that to work with our young people to make sure they get access to museums, look at cities, experience things in the news that they didn't have the time or capacity to explore otherwise. Now that so many places are putting their resources online and easily accessible. They're able to provide additional self-efficacy. So for young people, being able to have to rely on themselves a little bit more to, manage the technology, build it. There's some more accountability involved. That's another benefit of virtual mentoring. And so here are some things you want to make sure you get consider before you get started, right? We want to make sure, like with anything, we're doing anything. If we want to do it, we want to make sure we're doing it well. I apologize if I'm, stumbling a little bit over my words. This is our third webinar of the day, and so my brain's a little fried from looking at screens all day. But I actually this is a topic that I like to present on, so I'm glad that this is my, send off into the weekend. So considerations: reliable access to networks. We want to make sure that young people have access to internet in their house, right? To computers. A lot of virtual mentoring can happen, via phone or iPad, but you still need some kind of internet connection. And that's not always something that's very reliable for, or something we should take for granted for all young people. So we want to make sure we're doing what we can to make sure they're able to get access to those networks. Are there resources in the community? I know in some communities, Spectrum has been allowing young people to get access to, like families to get free internet service in their house if they weren't getting it before. I know some school districts are, allowing students to access hotspots, things like that. comfort with the relevant technology, particularly depending on what age. Um, I think one of the things that, we've been talking to a lot of programs about their transition during this time into something more akin to, or virtual mentoring. And one of the things that's come up a few times that I always thought was funny was that they think, they feel like they're almost taking for granted that, you know, the young people you work with would be good with technology. That's not always the case. Um, and I've heard a number of people mention that they were surprised at how hard the transition for some of their students was into using some of these platforms. They think because they're younger they pick it up, but some of them do struggle with it. And then on the other side of that, making sure that mentors, staff, whoever is on the other side of that from the young person is also comfortable with that technology as well. We want to make sure we're incorporating universal best practices. We're going to talk through a few of those today. I'll also make sure you get sent a copy of some recommendations and resources that are available from our national office's website. So if you want to take a little bit of a deeper look into some of that research, that's really a really great place to start. But we're going to go through a lot of those best practices today as well. And I believe, Bruce has, presented on some of those, and Brenda as well. Evaluate risk management. Obviously we're still dealing with young people, and how do we bring them into contact with adults? And we always have to make sure we're doing that in such a way as to minimize the impact of risk, right? We always want to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to minimize the risk of harm to a young person. So we're going to talk a bit about that too later on. Parental guidance. So we want to make sure that parents and families are engaged and on board with whatever it is that we're doing. So let's talk about relevant technology. So you want to select a platform that is suited for mentors and mentees. Any platform should be safe and approved. You want to stay away from group chats where anyone can join. So you want to be able to, set passwords. And we want to respect mentees' privacy. So some platforms to think about where anyone can join, right? So something like Skype is usually not a great choice because, anyone can just like search for someone's username and come up and add them and try to, contact with them. A lot of other places, I know a lot of people are using Zoom, which I use a lot and I think is a really good resource as long as you're taking advantage of their security features, like setting passwords, using waiting rooms, things like that. There's lots of other ones as well. But we want to make sure that it's suited for, again, individual conversation. It should be safe, and make sure that it's approved at some level, and that you are at least looking at it a little bit and vetting it in some possible way. And making sure that things are like password protected. I know Zoom has waiting rooms, which I think is great. Really good feature. Things like that. One of the other ones that we use a lot is called Jitsi, Jitsi, and we'll talk more about that next week. But those are some really good ones to consider as well. And of course, we want to respect mentees' privacy. So, thinking about, making sure not everyone can join, making sure it's private, making sure that, we're taking the steps that we can take in order to maintain that. So not letting anyone just get access virtually to our young people. Reviewing mentors. Let me just get the whole slide out. It's easier that way. Okay, so first is, using video chat, making sure that mentors are comfortable with it. So, if you use volunteer mentors or if you use staff, get on a video chat with them, talk to them a bit about, making sure they're comfortable using that platform, getting on, all of the various security features. How do they know how to use them? Do they know that they exist? Are they fluent in, the different features, things like that. Talk about program enhancements. So are you adding any particular activities that you want them to do? Are you adding any I know some programs I've talked to have added extra curriculums, so they're doing a lot more work around bringing in, say, college access curriculum for working with high school students. So they've develop more curriculum around, we're going to really work with them to use this time to really to get in deep and work with them on college admissions and financial aid and things like that. I think that's a really good use of this time because we want to make sure that we're having some kind of, I think virtual and e-mentoring works much, much, much better when you have activities, right? When we're just doing mentoring in the community or site-based or whatever it is, but in person, we would never just say like, here's an adult, here's a kid, sit at a table across from each other and stare at each other's face and have a conversation, right? We would always say, have some kind of activity, whether it's playing a board game, playing basketball, going for a walk, sharing something to eat, and something like that, because it's just really, really, really awkward to sit there across from someone else and stare into their eyes and just have a conversation. And so we're doing any kind of, virtual mentoring, we want to consider that in the same way. We don't want to just say, okay, FaceTime, here's FaceTime. Let's just stare into our phones and have a conversation. We want to have some kind of activities. And so we'll talk a lot more about different activities that we can use and different websites. My staff has been very busy putting together a whole list of those for you, and we'll talk through those a bit more in depth next Friday. But it's important to think about, how do we want to adapt our programming to be suitable for a virtual space? Are there certain activities that we want to do and curriculums we want to change, and how can we enhance what we offer? Online etiquette is extremely important. We want to make sure that, for example, examining mentor space is the next bullet point, but I think it's a good example of this, of, what's behind you on the video. I have a nice picture. I got the lighting looking pretty nice in here from having to be on webcam a ton. And so, those types of things can be really important. We don't want to just have mentors be in like their kitchen where family members are just walking back and forth in the back, and there's no sense of privacy, or like there's I don't know, like wine bottles in the back. Those might be things you want to avoid. So making sure we're having that kind of conversation. It's also a good boundaries thing because, I think it's important for mentors to share pieces of themselves with their mentee, but it's important to be careful of what those pieces are and how they're sharing them, and how do they do that in a way that is respectful and careful. It's on purpose. We want to share pieces of ourselves in a way that fosters a deeper relationship, not just throw ourselves into it and share all of ourselves in a way that pushes boundaries that shouldn't be pushed, right? We want to maintain that like we are still the adults in the situation. Other online etiquette, things like if you're setting a time that you're going to have a conversation with someone, who's going to call who? Are you going to send them the link via email? Are you sharing that kind of information, or phone numbers? How are you dispensing all of that out? Things like that. If you are screen sharing, making sure there's not stuff on like a computer desktop you wouldn't want students seeing, things like that. You'd be surprised that I've seen that a few times where, a mentor will share something on their desktop, but it's something like, it's not something like horrific, but it'll be like, I don't know, I think I saw one where I was talking to someone who shared something and on their desktop was like all of their previous year like taxes. And so the student was like, kept asking them to see it. And it was just like, it was a really awkward conversation where the mentor would be like, no, you can't like see all my tax information. But it was just like a very awkward scenario that could have just been avoided by not having that on your computer desktop, or, not having your work email open, share your screen and being like, oh, let me switch out of this. I know that's happened a number of times to people that I know, especially who are, staff mentoring young people. They'll share their screen to watch a YouTube video and forget to close out of their work or personal email, things like that. We want to make sure that, we're addressing with mentors. Virtual training. So we want to make sure that as we are transitioning into this, virtual mentoring. We're talking to mentors about what that looks like, but we need to make sure that we're adjusting our training to also my computer is not liking what's happening right now. That should be better. We need to make sure that all of our mentors are getting adequately trained in that stuff as well. So not just a brief overview, but really spending time to sit down with them and say, these are the things that we're really going to make sure we're talking about. So scheduling, right? We want to make sure that similar to any kind of mentor relationship, if we're in the community, but you might not be used to having to do this if people are used to doing site-based programming, is how are we scheduling those meetings? And so training your mentors on, connecting with mentees, setting boundaries about when and where they're going to meet. So are they going to talk online in the afternoons, in the mornings? When are best times that mentees are most available? They can get away from their families for a little bit and spend some time. Do they have space? Are there restrictions by their parents on when they're allowed to use technology? I know some kids and families don't let their students use technology after 7, 8 p.m. or early in the morning, or might have them take breaks or have scheduled times during the day that they're doing homework for school, things like that. We want to make sure that we're considering. So privacy considerations, we talked about that before, mentees especially as well. We want to make sure that they have access to spaces where they can share and not be overheard. And so, that's something you might want to consider when you're kind of addressing, do we do video? Does maybe a text or email type system work better for us, or a combination of both? Do we have access to both? So if a mentee wants to talk about something that is not something they want their family overhearing, is the way they can get that information to their mentor. Enhancing communication. We want to make sure that communicating virtually is different than communicating in person. Facial expressions are a lot more important. So we want to make sure that we are, talking to mentors about how to be more expressive and share things, and make sure I like to use little emojis and things like that just to spice it up, because otherwise, if we're just, typing back and forth, it can be really, really blah. We want to make sure that we're, it's fun, it's communication, it's hanging out with these people. We want to make it an enjoyable experience. I know some programs are having a harder time keeping young people engaged in, wanting to stay logging in and talking to them. And so, things like this will really help keep them engaged, right? We want to make sure that it's still something that's fun, especially if they're using videos and things like this for school. We have to keep thinking about, how do we make our programs not like school? We want them to feel different, even though they're going to feel very similar because they might be using the same software. Once they get on there, how are we engaging with them in a way that makes it more fun? And so how we communicate, again, facial expressions, emojis, using different music, things like that can make a really big difference. How are they checking in with their supervisors and the program managers? Do you have systems in place for them to access you? Are you setting up Zoom or virtual calls with them to make sure there's some sort of system in place? That's going to be really important. Reporting. How are they reporting back to you this is happening? Do you have a system in place already that is about where they report that, we met this day and this time, this is what we discussed, and we have a form? Do we need to help, we need to help you make up a system and protocol for that and some forms? How are you making sure that, you're tracking what they're working on, what types of things they're doing together, things like that. We want to make sure you have a system in place and that they're trained on how to do that. So that the communication isn't just happening between mentor and mentee, but also between program and mentor, right? Supervisors and people they're supervising. What does that communication look like? So a few policies and procedures to think about, again, be vigilant about privacy. We can't stress this enough. This is the biggest thing with virtual mentoring is privacy, both on and off camera, as well as making sure that we're careful about who is accessing our young people virtually, as well as protecting their information and their data. We don't want to just be putting them out there. And so that's really the most important, I think, thing when it comes to virtual mentoring is making sure we're understanding how are we helping them stay protected, and what are we putting in place, and what software are we using to make sure that's happening. This is not something that I think you have to adopt, but I strongly encourage you to think of personal phones and email and stuff as being something that they shouldn't. If you have work email, I think that's one of the things I like most about things like Zoom or Jitsi is you can send it to them and they don't need to log in. And so I wouldn't say it's a strictly forbidden. One of my colleagues wrote this, and so I think he was gearing it towards some other folks more specifically, but I would err against it though if you have the option, using something like your work email or setting up an email for volunteers that you have to use in your system, or using a Google Voice number is what I've used a lot. If for texting and calling, so you can set clearer boundaries. Those are a lot more preferable because that way you can kind of monitor access to you, and so you can say you can turn off the call forwarding at 8 p.m. so you're not getting calls from people if they want to call or text you at 8 p.m. or before 8 a.m. or whatever it is. So I think that's an important consideration. And again, it's more about making sure that you are, from your program's perspective, consistent and thoughtful about it. So if you decide that that is something you want to do, understanding what sort of potential liability is there for that. We want to make sure that all of the communications that are happening between all of the providers and support staff and program participants are really about the program, right? So they're about what's happening with you. That's pretty broad with mentoring youth development programs. We want to make sure that it's focused on the young person and their development. I think that's really important for this because as those boundaries get blurred, it's that much more important to stay really focused on what is our program about, what are we working on, what are we doing. It's really important to make sure that parents and guardians are, kept in the loop about any of this stuff, right? So are we sharing different media with them? Are they, let's make sure we're having them in the conversation as much as possible. So who are the adults in their lives and making sure we're looping them in as much as we can about any of this, particularly with the virtual mentoring. So let's talk about establishing some guidelines. Programs should establish clear rules and regulations for all e-mentoring. This is something that should be true for any kind of mentoring or any types of relationship between adults and young people, right? We want to have clear rules and regulations. We want to have boundaries. What we don't want to have, especially if we're dealing with volunteer mentors, but even with paid staff, we don't want to allow people to have as little gray area as possible when it comes to making their own judgment calls. We want to make sure that they understand both where their responsibilities end and where they begin. Because the more times that mentors are having to make those kind of judgment calls during a mentoring session, the more stress and strain is put on them to figure out and set their own boundaries. But if you said, for example, if you said, we as a program really don't want you to be using your personal cell phone number, so we'll help you set up a Google Voice number, and we'd prefer if you used, I don't know, a program like our Zoom account to be able to mentor, so we can provide some oversight. And we'd also prefer if you met during the hours of like 3 to 7, right? And so what that allows, one, is the mentor knows that these are exactly the times and restrictions, just as examples of what that looks like. But then it also means that if they want to set their boundaries, it makes them not have to be the bad guy anymore, right? Because they want to maintain that relationship. And so it gives them a little bit of support when they want to set their own boundaries in a way that they might not have if it's just like, listen, it's a difference between saying, I just don't really feel comfortable talking to you after 8 p.m. and I don't want you to have my call me after that. And then saying it that way and saying, the program really doesn't want us talking after this time. Why don't we set up a time at like 4 p.m. to have this conversation, right? That's a very different way of approaching things. And so I think the more clear rules and regulations that we can have, particularly in a situation like virtual mentoring where those boundaries can get blurred, I think is absolutely crucial. Scheduling meetings that is consistent and convenient is really, really good guideline. So, if you're saying we're meeting every Friday at 4, then meet every Friday at 4. We'll talk a bit about trauma-informed mentoring in a little while, but that type of structure is really, really, really good for young people. I'm sure this isn't news to you, but we want to make sure, it's as predictable as possible because if nothing else, it'll help them just, remember and show up, which is really something that we want to have happen. Guidelines around personal presentation, making sure people aren't showing up in their pajamas if that's not something you want them to be doing as representatives of your program. And guidelines about space, we talked about that, but again, it's really important to think about what is the backdrop, is there, I was on just a work, call with someone, we were video calling the other day, and we're both in our homes, and he was in a more of an open area, and I could see like his family members walking behind him, going out of the kitchen, and there's like a bathroom door over there, and it seems like a pretty, it was in New York City, so he doesn't have a huge apartment to share, so I understand, but it was one of those things that I was thinking of, like, not even just for him, but for all of his family members who are on like a, for me, I wouldn't want my wife being on a video call with the back of the camera facing like the door to the bathroom. Okay, so group skills. I don't know how many of you are doing any kind of, group or, any kind of mentoring that's happening in a group, but I think there's some important considerations there. So we'll just talk through those quickly. Again, maintaining a schedule, being consistent is even more important when you're dealing in a group setting, especially virtually. We want to make sure that, especially in a group, it's very hard to manage a lot of people at once, especially in like on a Zoom call or something like that. So having some structure to it makes that a lot easier, even more so than it would be in person. Really begin each session with an open-ended check-in. We tried to do that at the webinar here. I had a poll, but then also just ask an open-ended question about what types of things are you guys doing for self-care? How are you all feeling today? I think that that's a really great way to start because sometimes you can have some type of, planned topic for the day, but if a bunch of them are, really feeling, we want to make sure that young people have the space to guide the conversation in a way that's important and authentic to them. So sometimes we have to just toss aside all of our plans for the day because, they just really need to spend some time processing something that happened in the news or at home, or, they just need something that we couldn't have predicted. Maintain that full engagement. So different activities is really important for this, especially in a group setting, it can be really easy to kind of have like 6 of them on a video screen and just kind of go one by one and check in with each of them. As much as possible, we want to make sure we're engaging with all of them, together. So having group conversations. If someone shares something, maybe ask someone else, what do you think about that? What would you say about this? Facilitate that as a group conversation, not as just like 6 individual mentoring relationships. There's also different group activities that you can do, which I think can be really helpful in that regard. We want to make sure they're engaged. Establish ground rules for meeting online, like raising your hands before sharing. Again, we want to make it interactive, but we don't want them checking out. But at the same time, you also don't want 6 people all talking over each other on a conference call. So this is where that structure really comes into play. In the same way that you would do this in person, it's just a little bit more acute online if you're not really doing it. So it's really important to set that structure and those ground rules. And you can have them weigh in on that. I always, especially in a group setting, if I'm setting ground rules and expectations with a group of young people, to have them develop them as much as possible. So what types of ground rules would they like, and have some ownership of the process. Be creative with online activities. So next week we're going to talk a lot about different activities that you can do. We have a ton of different ones, but there's lots of great tours of museums, national parks, and college campuses that are really useful. A lot of these programs, like software, allows us to screen share and share videos, watch things together, explore things. I was on just with some of my friends. We were on a Zoom call the other day, and one of them shared their screen, and it was some friends that I gone to college with. And we went on Google Maps and Street View to like the college campus, and just kind of like walked around the campus together, and were like shared memories about being at school, you know. And there's things like that that we can do with our mentors and mentees as well. So make participants responsible for activity searches. Like we talked about before, as much ownership as you can put on them to bring activities and content to the table, the better, because then you know it's something they actually care about and are interested in. Sometimes, you know, if we're bringing content to the table all the time, it can feel like we're just like blindly throwing darts at a wall and hoping one of them hits a bullseye. But if we're able to bring the dartboard closer to us and get a bullseye every time, why wouldn't we? And that's, you know, asking them to say, why don't you bring some content that you'd like to talk about today to the table, and we can really, you know, address that collectively. And again, you know, any required program documentation, we want to make sure, you know, people are doing even in that group setting, because it can be a lot easier to kind of forget about it when you have to jot down 6 names and 6 different things that you worked on, or, you know, whatever. So even in that group setting, we want to make sure we're doing that. So again, why don't you put in the question box quickly, you know, what types of things have you been doing to communicate with friends and family these past couple weeks? What's worked for you? What hasn't? What's been challenging? You know, take a minute to put a couple of things in there. I see some people have been using Zooms as well. Um, Feeling a little burnt out by it. I hear that. Texting and phone calls, yeah, absolutely. Those are things that are, you know, really good things to do. But you know, I agree. It's after a certain point in the day, it's like, um, you know, like today, I've basically been on various either webinars or meetings from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. straight. So as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to go read a book and go for a walk or something. No screens for a little while. But, you know, it's important to think about a lot of the young people that we're dealing with are dealing with a lot of the same things. So, you know, they might be using these different technological tools to talk to friends, family, things like that. And they're going to feel similarly, you know, kind of burnt out from these screens as we are. And so, you know, we have to keep that in mind and think about, you know, in the same way that we're having relationships and building relationships with each other and with family members and friends, they're going through the same thing. And so we want to make sure that, you know, we're honoring that and respecting that. Yeah, that's how I feel sometimes, just spending all day on something. So enhancing communication. We talked a little bit about this, but I just want to draw on it again. Facial expressions, using the whole gamut of expressions that, you know, your face can do. So everything from, you know, lighting up and being really excited to, like, you know, really listening in. Everything should feel a little bit more exaggerated when they're on the webcam. Talking slowly and waiting for responses. There can be lag times. If their network isn't all that great, things like that. Really making sure we're thinking about how are we coming across to them on the other side. How do we do monitoring and support with our mentors during things like this? So checking in with them frequently, making sure that they're, know that we're there for them. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that any kind of program coordinator can do for the people who are working with young people under them, is just make sure they feel supported and cared about. Make sure we're using the webcam for check-ins as well, so you can make sure that, one, that they're comfortable with it, that they know how to use it all, that they're fluent in kind of, the technology. Also allows you to see, again, what's their space like, how are they presenting themselves. You can provide feedback. Asking mentors how they are before asking how the match is going. The young people and the mentees are not the only ones going through a health crisis right now. All of us are as well. And we want to make sure that we're there to support the mentors as much as they're there to support the mentees. We're all dealing with this in our own ways. And so it's important to make sure that we're connecting with the mentors about their struggles as well, and just listening to all of them. And then exploring any new activity ideas with mentors, share new ideas when they find them. So, if you hear about some really cool website, that'd be a great activity to do, sharing that. If you find out about something that really works from another mentor, share that with them. I think it can be really crucial, especially in times like this, to bring mentors together. That's so important. So setting up group video calls with all of your mentors, I think is a really useful tool. They can share tips and tricks together. They can feel like other people are sharing the same frustrations as them. It's a really powerful tool. And it's something that we encourage programs to do a lot, even when we're not talking about virtual mentoring, but I think it's even more important when we are. So here's just a couple activity ideas. Again, we're going to go through them in a lot more detail a week from now, but the Kennedy Center is doing some really great video performances. So they were doing them during lunch, and there's different activities on the Kennedy Center website. So they'll go live at lunchtime, but you can access them whenever. I've been checking them in the evenings. The San Diego Zoo, which I just realized is spelled wrong on here, but it's San Diego, not Diego. But they have really cool online activities. I actually was doing some with some family members the other day. Some young people in my family who were, they were pretty young, but like 6, 7, 8. But they had some really great activities on there as well for high school age students that I thought was really cool. And then I always think Mad Libs are fun. It's a really great way to just kind of like get a laugh out with your mentee. It's super low risk, low stress, just a little funny thing to do and get the conversation going. So there's a great place you can do that on eduplace.com. And then Audible has been doing a whole bunch of free stories and audiobooks, which have been really fun. I like audiobooks. I think that kind of stuff is cool. And so, they have a lot of short stories. And so you can listen to them together or have the, mentees listen separately and then discuss. Those are really cool things to kind of connect and bond over. And then, oh yeah, this was on NPR. They had a really great comic that was about explaining coronavirus to young people and kind of making it accessible, that I thought was really interesting. And we'll send you all these slides so you can have the links. So don't feel like you got to like write that whole thing down. But I thought that was really well done. So let's recap. Virtual mentoring can work. In fact, it does work. But I think we also have to recognize that it is not going to be the same as in-person mentoring. And so we have to think of it as not so much just a facsimile of the mentoring we're used to doing virtually, so much as it's its own kind of beast, right? It's its own animal, and we have to make sure that as we design our curriculums, as we're talking about how we do it, that we're doing it well and understanding the differences. That there are considerations for safe and effective e-mentoring, particularly around privacy, particularly around software considerations. And so there's no right or wrong. You just want to make sure that the security The security features on the whatever platform you're using does have things like password protection, things like waiting rooms that people can get let in or booted out. Things like that are really important. But we have to make sure we have some kind of protocols in place. Understand the available technology, not just which one's safe and effective in terms of platforms, but also are you going to use different platforms for different things? Are you going to use Zoom for video chatting, but maybe you want to set up a Slack channel for people to be able to chat on their phones with texting, or set up a WhatsApp group or GroupMe or something like that, right? So all of the different available technology and how are we maximizing that? And we can use different pieces of it to fill different gaps. Support staff, so anyone who's really just in that space, working directly supporting our young people. So whether they are, I think we take it for granted that mentors need enhanced training, but understanding as well that staff who might not be volunteers, if you run a youth development program that uses paid staff, also need that enhanced training. I think sometimes programs can take for granted that their paid staff don't need the same training that volunteers might. But if your program doesn't even use volunteers and just uses paid staff as mentors, then we want to make sure we're definitely training them. And if there's someone that has a mix of both or just uses volunteers, we want to make sure everyone is getting that enhanced training. Expanding those policies and guidelines. From a liability perspective, we want to make sure that we're able to think about what sort of things are shifting and changing. What are the new policies and guidelines we need to have in place so that we can say, we considered this and we did our best to, reduce the risk of harm, things like that. We want to make sure that those policies and guidelines are thoughtful. Those virtual group skills. So again, a lot of times with virtual mentoring, it's not one-to-one, it's in like a group setting. And doing a group mentoring session can be tricky enough in person, and can be even more so virtually. I couldn't think of that word for a second. Better online communication. We want to make sure that we are, communicating well online, that we are having conversations with each other that are, again, honoring the differences that online communication is just different than in person. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different. And so things like facial expressions, the way we talk, the way we type, and the way we, use emojis or exclamation points or things like that, and how we convey tone can be really important. Coaching and supporting providers. So, as young people are, whoever is providing that support to young people, we need to make sure they're being coached and supported, whether that is, again, volunteer mentors, paid staff, whoever it is. And then lastly, activity ideas, right? So making sure that we have, we're giving our mentors activities to use and, things like that. We want to make sure they have a library of resources at their disposal. And again, we'll get very in depth with that next week around different tools and activities that you can do online. And so that's it. If you have any questions, put them in the question box. I try to save the last 10 or 15 minutes or so we can have some specific questions you might have about things that you are dealing with. You will get all of the slides and recording of this and all of that in your email, probably on Monday, because it takes a little bit of time for the recording to process. And you'll be able to email all of us here for additional support as well. So I'm gonna put my email in the chat so you have it, but obviously you'll get the email from me with all of the information on it today or Monday. So let me open up the question box as people put in questions. So here's one. Looking for resources to speak to parents of the mentees about how to help their kids doing school at home. I don't think there's any specific resources for that. I do think that supporting parents is really important, but every school is a little bit different. And so, I think the biggest thing that we can do is also use our platforms to create space for parents to get supported and feel cared about and considered. And so if you can, set up parent sessions as part of your Zoom or Zoom calls, or or whatever platform, and have like a few parents get together and share. I think that one of the big things is um, one of the big things is making sure that parents feel stressed and feel supported and cared about as well, right? So for a lot of parents who are helping young people navigate some of these, especially virtual school mentoring and virtual schoolwork and things like that, it's just very stressful because a lot of parents are either working full-time jobs and trying to help their kids school, or they're not working at all, and so their income is impacted. There's a lot of stress with that. There's lots of different dynamics in place, and so I think where we can fit in is not necessarily to give them a lot of uh, technical support on how to do that, but instead provide the same type of emotional support that we provide the students, right? Is for parents, and say, here's a space where you can, share your frustrations and feel supported, and have your struggles normalized. Oh yeah, so our national office, so we are the New York State affiliate of the National Mentoring Partnership, and they partnered with an organization called ICouldBe.org, who has been, they're a mentoring program that has been doing e-mentoring for a long time. And so they partnered together to create a platform for programs to access for free to start implementing virtual mentoring. I do know that they've been slowly rolling it out. So there's, if you go to ICouldBe.org, and I'll include this in the email I send out if you haven't gotten it already, it'll ask about signing up for their portal, as well as it's on our national office's website, which is mentoring, mentoring.org. But again, I'll send these out to you so you have it. They have a place to access it. I know that when they first launched it, it was still just, so ICouldBe is just text-based, so it's email back and forth, it's not video. I know they were planning to add video. I haven't heard that they've done that yet, but it's possible that they did. I don't know that was the plan. They were also rolling it out, so you can register your program, and they're just giving up different programs at a time, so that way their servers don't get overloaded. But that's a really great way to get some access to free software to help do your mentoring. The thing about their software that I think is really great is they have a whole curriculum for their program that they're letting a lot of programs access through their portal. So they have a whole curriculum, and it's baked right into the software. So as you're doing your kind of mentoring, there's curriculum, there's activities, there's all sorts of stuff just already in there. And I know they're trying to figure out how to help programs put their own curriculum and activities into their system. And I think that's one of the biggest things that, things that are just like video chat software just can't offer. So, if you're using, say, Zoom to video chat, and then Google Docs to help them write a college essay, and they're doing, over here in a browser sharing, doing research, there's just like 4 different applications open you're trying to share. So as much as we can kind of get those things into one platform, I think is a little bit more successful. And so they've done a good job of that. And that is one of the things I love about their platform. So they have access to it on their website. I think they're still asking for signups, but I'll double check. Like I said, the last I heard, it was still email based, but there's something to be said for having it all in there via email, because it makes for program managers to be able to go in and monitor the conversations a lot easier. So that's where that's at. But I will double check and make sure that is all in the email that you get sent, either probably on Monday, because I want to make sure this video finishes processing before I send it to you. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, well, if you do have any other questions that do come up, don't hesitate to reach out to either myself, Bruce Beckwith, or Brenda Jimenez. I think most of you have met at least one of the 3 of us, if not all 3 of us. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I put my email address in the chat, and you'll get all of our contact information as well in the follow-up email that'll go out on Monday with some additional resources. So next week, we'll be talking again specifically around virtual activities. So my team's done a lot of research in different activities that people can do online, different websites that have interactive games and activities that are both academic and enriching, but also some that are just fun. And so we'll spend some time talking about that next week at the same time, and I hope that all of you can make it for that as well. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday. I hope you have a really great weekend, and thank you again.